the land. When the Brooklyn Royal Giants came to an existence in 1905 with owner John W. Connors, he would collect the usual rental fees, but Nathaniel craved more. Thus began a power struggle for the Royal Giants, with the Brooklyn Royal Giants being the only club being owned by a black man. Over the next few years, Strong would hike the fees for Brighton Oval to attempt to bankrupt John W. Connors so he could take over the club. Connors would attempt to resist, fleeing Brooklyn and setting up a team in Harlem and playing at Harlem Oval. Connors would look for support from other black men within baseball, but their tepid response made it clear that the battle to remain the only black owner in Eastern black baseball faced long odds. Having many of his players rated by other teams, John Connors could no longer resist the advances of Nathaniel Strong, with other local teams being pressured by Strong to boycott the Brooklyn Royal Giants. Connors could not get games, and by 1911, he was forced to sell the team to Strong. Now the owner of several ballparks and the Brooklyn Royal Giants, Nathaniel Strong completely dominated small-time ball in New York. Rube Foster would notice these events and realize that black ball was in danger of being defined by its white owners, so he decided to play a more active role in the game's future. At the time, the Leland Giants were whipping up on the competition in the Chicago City League and on tours, but they were losing money. Leland was not Nathaniel Strong, and rather than driving up the team's cut to extortion levels, Leland allowed opponents to collect almost as much of the profits as he did. So Frank Leland would bring in Rube Foster to Chicago, but Rube Foster only agreed to join the team on one condition: he could pitch and take charge of the booking and as manager. As both pitcher and manager, he guided the team to a 110-10 record, but his once cinder block frame had turned soft and round, and he was only capable of sporadic starts. But his style as a manager was no different than his style as a player: very aggressive and intimidating. He was an innovative strategist, and his team popularized the hit and run, the drag bunt, the double steal, and the suicide squeeze, and what he called the bunt and run. It was an advancing runner from first to third and with a surprise bunt. One game, as the story goes, his Giants were down 18-0 against the Indianapolis ABCs, and in the eighth inning, Foster signaled for 11 bunts in a row. Opposing fielders were so confused that they couldn't get anybody out that the Giants went on to hit 2 grand slams and tied the score before the game was called on account of darkness. As a booker, Foster was able to turn the Leland Giants around, receiving 40% of the gates, reaping around $500, up from $140 they had been collecting during Leland's booking days. At the same time, ticket prices rose to major league levels to 50 cents for the grandstand seating. Foster was not happy with just being a player and a manager of the Giants. He wanted to dominate the business of black baseball. So in 1909, Rube would inform Frank Leland that he wanted him to recuse himself from all facets of the business operation of the Leland Giants. Thus became a battle of wills between Foster and Leland. Foster reportedly faked an injury to stay out of the lineup as a message to Leland. The point for Rube in any endeavor was to always come out ahead. And in October, he gave Leland an ultimatum: either you go or I go, and I form my own Leland Giant team. Leland held firm, and so did Foster. But before Rube quit, he carefully laid plans to take 2 of Leland's most valuable money men, Major R. Jackson and the attorney Beauregard Mosley. Knowing that he had been outmaneuvered, Leland filed a lawsuit to stop Foster from forming any team under Leland's name. Rube would countersue, claiming that he had every right to use the name as he so pleased. In a strange verdict of the lawsuit, the courts gave Foster exclusive rights to the name Leland Giants, but gave Frank Leland exclusive rights to Chicago's Auburn Park, and enjoined Foster from taking any of Leland's players. In the aftermath, after this strange decision, Foster and Major Jackson created their own version of the Leland Giants, while Leland and his suddenly no-name team changed their name to the Chicago Giants. Foster started to raid Eastern black baseball teams of their best players. Foster would warn black ball clubs that they better start preparation to cleanse black baseball of its racial impurities, and Foster may as well have been looking directly at Nathaniel Strong. Strong was the greatest obstacle in Foster's pathway to glory for himself and for black baseball. Foster would encroach on Nathaniel Strong's territory while Nathaniel was unsuccessful in attempting to block him from booking games. The irony of Foster's fight against Nathaniel Strong is that Nathaniel Strong was not the only white businessman in black baseball. There had been no fewer than 30 stadiums used by pro and semi-pro black teams, and none of them were owned by black interests. Rube understood that black teams had a far better chance at success if, instead of paying booking fees to white stadium owners, they used their own facilities at their own ballparks. As it would happen, Charlie Kaminsky was moving the White Sox to Kaminsky Parks, a brand new 28,000-seat facility, and meant that Southside Park was sitting vacant at the right time. Foster was complaining about the conditions of the team's current facility at Normal Park. So Foster would form a partnership with John Shoring, a white tavern owner in Chicago. Foster gave Shoring half of the Chicago American Giants, and this allowed Charlie Kaminsky to form a business relationship with Rube Foster through Shoring. In this agreement, Foster would own the title to the park, while Kaminsky retained the deed through Shoring to the overall grounds, which let Foster stake the claim that he was the owner of the ballpark and gave the Giants a permanent home. Foster was focused on making black baseball America's game, with black men standing toe-to-toe with each other. To do this, Foster would begin having the Giants emulate the rituals of major league teams, with the intention to force-feed black professionalism into white consciousness as a first step towards integration while continuing to stand on their own. As early as 1910, Foster began to talk about reviving the concept of a national colored league. He would state, "The time is now at hand for the formation of colored leagues should receive much consideration. In fact, I believe it's an absolute necessity." Unfortunately, Foster's first experience with a black league would expose him to the same problems that plagued other black leagues. He tasked Beauregard Mosley with the task of sounding out the Midwestern and Southern black clubs with the idea of joining the league. By 1910, he had tentative plans for 7 teams: Kentucky Cubs, the New Orleans Eagles, the Mobile Tigers, the St. Louis Giants, and the Kansas City Giants, and Kansas City, Missouri, and Columbus, Ohio. Foster felt success would force recognition from minor white leagues to play them and share in their receipts. His goal reflected Foster's one-step-at-a-time method at possible integration, but this raised the stakes of the Negro League, and the league collapsed from lack of proper funding even before playing a game. Foster now had to backtrack and focus on the Leland Giants, now named the American Giants. While Shoring Park was being renovated, the Giants plowed through the barnstorming trail, winning 123 of 129 games in 1910. And even after Shoring Park was completed, Foster kept the Giants on the run because competition in the Chicago leagues had faded and because he didn't want to face Frank Leland. Foster also understood that it was endless competition throughout the country, and he wanted the Chicago American Giants to become a symbol of black baseball. Although the American Giants rarely played in Chicago, Frank Leland's Chicago Giants were eclipsed by Rube's enormous shadow. He pushed aging players, with Leland finally taking back the Leland Giants name the moment Rube Foster dumped it. By 1914, the Leland Giants were profusely losing money, and Frank Leland suffered a heart attack and died at the age of 45. With Leland gone, Rube Foster agreed to take on the ailing Leland Giants, but in one last slap in the face to Leland, he used them as a traveling team, a minor league refuge for unproven and has-been American Giants players. In 1917, the United States entered World War I with almost 370,000 black men joining the military. The war years actually advanced black enterprise, with the manpower needed for defense plants and industrial factories accelerating black migration from the South. At the war's end, Rube was determined to get his Negro League off the ground, and the large wartime infusion of blacks in the large cities gave Rube a large pool of fans for black baseball, with major league teams weakened by the wartime loss of players. And those losses turned into losses at the box office. Thus, major league white teams began to shy away from direct competition with black teams, the prime concern being to avoid embarrassing moments. Some men of color at the time did make small gains in the white major leagues, but they were not African Americans. Players like Native American Jim Thorpe and Cuban players like Armando Marsans and third baseman Rafael Alameda, all played in the major leagues, but the black wave never materialized. So when campaigning for the Negro Leagues in 1919, Foster's main target was not attempting to alienate white major league teams, but rather white promoters like Nathaniel Strong. In print in the Chicago Defender, Foster urged black baseball club owners to join, stating, in not allowing white men to own, manage, or doing like they feel like doing as they did in the semi-pro teams ran by underhanded methods. Foster was the driving force behind the formation of the Negro Leagues and its governing body, the National Association for Colored Professional Baseball Clubs. The owners would meet to ratify the creation of the league, held in February 13th and 14th in 1920, with a group of C.I. Taylor of the Indianapolis ABCs and Joe Green of the Chicago Giants, John Matthews of the Dayton Marcos, Charles Hill of the St. Louis Giants, but one businessman who had been invited but refused to come was newcomer Ed Bolden, who was likely irked by the fact that Foster had ignored his team, the Hilldale Athletic Club. Then in 1919, Rube seeing a huge payday scheduled 3 games at Hilldale Park, and Foster would drill the Hilldales in the first 2 games but lost the third. This did not sit well with Rube. He would rip the Hilldales, calling them the Hillbillies and saying that their own victory was an empirical robbery. With the Negro League quickly coming together, Rube didn't want Bolden to work with Nathaniel Strong. Strong began to court Bolden, offering the owner a variety of concessions to align himself in a league that he was attempting to form on his own. Strong felt that this alliance was essential to the success of his future league. Meanwhile, John W. Connors had become a major irritation for Strong. He had been lying in wait since he had been forced to sell the team in 1912 with the Baccarat Giants of Atlantic City. Connors found a way to get his revenge. The Baccarat Giants had become a major rival in the East but had gone under in 1918, and Connors would purchase the club and move it to Harlem, using the aid and economic leverage of a man who could not only pierce Strong's monopoly but absolutely terrifying. This was notorious gangster and owner of the exclusive club named Baron Wilkins. Connor would bring in Wilkins as a co-owner. Nathaniel Strong would attack Connors and Wilkins for offering Coons more money than he could. Strong saw the Hillsdales as his trump card, and he would make very strong overtures to Bolden, but Bolden would decline those overtures from both Foster and Strong, 2 of the most powerful men in black baseball. Strong was livid and even attempted to reform the old Philadelphia Giants and set them up in Delaware County just so they could be a rival to Bolden, but they never made it one season. Foster would also attempt to woo Bolden, but Bolden repeatedly refused to attend meetings. Foster would go on to declare the Hillsdales, the Baccarat, the Lincoln Giants, the Brooklyn Royal Giants, all who rebuffed his league, were now outlawed, and accused Bolden of attempting to foment dissent within the black game by encouraging players to contract jump. Foster would switch gears, believing that he had neutralized the threat of Bolden by getting white promoter J.L. Wilkinson to join the league with a new club that Wilkinson was attempting to develop. The problem for Rube is that he previously called for all teams to be owned by black entrepreneurs, but having a white promoter did make some sense, and it helped tap into the Kansas City market, and only Wilkinson was able to pony up the $500 entry fee. So with that, Wilkinson created the Kansas City Monarchs. The league was already had issues of racial purity because the game had been heavily infiltrated by white entrepreneurs. For example, the St. Louis Giants were owned by black businessman Charles Mills, but the club had been incorporated in 1920 and effectively placed under the control of white financiers. Rube had complete and total control over the league, and the construction of the Negro Baseball League bound all players to play when and where Foster directed, and against whatever team he selected. All equipment had to be purchased from Foster, including bats, baseballs, and uniforms, and Rube would explain that the collective purchase would translate into savings, but he didn't explain that he was getting a discount from dealers to allow him to make a profit from the owners. With all this power, he began moving players from team to team in an attempt to create parity amongst the league's clubs. With Foster's prints all over the league's business, the league charters teams would agree to pay 5% of their gate to the league office in Chicago, and Foster took no salary from the league, but demanded the spoils from the league's booking agent. Foster started to look more and more like the man he hated in Nathaniel Strong. Foster recognized that the league's franchises needed their own park to be leased or owned. However, only Foster in Chicago, Tenny Blount in Detroit, and Charles Mills in St. Louis possessed their own permanent place to play. All other league teams played in white-owned parks who were dependent on there being gaps in the baseball schedule to play their games. As a result, the Negro League, which was originally scheduled to have 100 games, but each of the league's 8 teams began to play as you can. At one point, the American Giants had played 20 games, while the Dayton Marcos had only played 6. Some teams began to skip weekend dates set for league contests if the trip was too long or the game was unattractive and unprofitable. Foster spent hours attempting to resolve the league's issues. If a team ran out of money or was stranded on the road, Foster would wire the team money to get home. When the teams were close to going bankrupt, Foster would send payroll in advance to keep the team afloat and would pump weak clubs by arranging to roster players, and a growing obsession with making the Negro League work would force Foster to step aside from the American Giants' duties in 1922. The Negro League's first season was a bit of a mess. They didn't even keep statistical records, not even wins and losses, because of the unbalanced schedule and the lack of press coverage. Rube would unilaterally crown the American Giants the winner of the league's first pennant, and the statistical records may have been lost, but the financial records were meticulous. During the season, the 8 teams drew in $600,000 in admissions, and the Western Booking Agency made almost $11,000 from those league teams. Meanwhile, Ed Bolden's black team played almost no other black teams. In 1920, he was able to book a 6-game series against a white Major League All-Star barnstorming team, a team with Babe Ruth coming off his 54 home run season in his first season with the Yankees, and would schedule those games to compete against the American Giants in New York. And throughout the 1920 season, Bolden and Foster would battle in long distance. Foster struck an agreement with John Connor and his partner Baron Wilkinson to enter the Negro League as an associate member. While not formerly a member of the league, they could schedule games and boost attendance, and it would allow Rube to infiltrate Nate Strong's turf. Connor was so grateful for the assistance that he apparently believed that it was incumbent upon him to cripple another foe, Ed Bolden. Connors raided the Hillsdale of some of their top players. Bolden was so upset that he filed a suit against the players for breach of contract, citing the 1902 Supreme Court ruling that upheld the baseball's reserve clause. Bolden won a temporary injunction, but had to post a $2,000 bond to protect the players from the loss of income. Bolden would drop the suit after that. Bolden felt that he had no other option but to seek accommodation with Nathaniel Strong, but at this point, Bolden was quite bigger than Strong and had the upper hand now. Instead of an amalgamation of teams, now all Nathaniel Strong got was a neutrality agreement that allowed games between the Hillsdales and the Brooklyn Royal Giants. Foster was impressed by Bolden's moves because they were so similar to his own, and clearly Bolden knew that he couldn't continue to ignore the Negro National League. Bolden wanted the protection that Rube had given the New York Bacharachs, and just days after his truce with Nathaniel Strong, Bolden shocked his ally by turning his back on Strong and coming to terms with Rube Foster and becoming an associate member of the Negro National League, preventing the Hillsdales from playing the Strong's Royal Giants. Now, with the league's new wider borders, the Negro League began its 1921 season. The Dayton Marcos moved to Columbus, but the club would disappear after 1921, as did the St. Louis Giants. The Negro League was now mired in logistical issues. The American Giants would win the pennant that year with a record of 41-21, but never played a game against St. Louis while playing a 6-game series in Darby, Pennsylvania against the Hillsdales. The Giants may have won the league crown, but the year belonged to Oscar Charleston, the outfielder who played for the St. Louis Giants this season, but Foster had been pushing hard for more comprehensive coverage from the black press. Before St. Louis folded, the team was hitting a league best .286 with Charleston batting an amazing .446. In contrast, the American Giants finished dead last in hitting at .237 with only 2 players hitting over .300. Yet this was one of Foster's best teams because of their speeding hitting. The Giants ace Dave Brown went 10-2 and pitched 5 shutouts with a 1-hitter against the Kansas City Monarchs. By the end of the 1921 season, the Negro League had made it 2 years almost purely on Rube Foster's will, but they were showing cracks despite Foster's manipulation of the rosters and bailing out sinking teams. Columbus went under, as did St. Louis, who were replaced with the St. Louis Stars in the same year that the Pittsburgh Keystones. But within a year, those teams would be gone too. While the core teams made money, Chicago, Kansas City, and Indianapolis, the ABCs were crushed when C.I. Taylor, the co-owner and manager, died in 1922 at the age of 50, and league attendance was down 25% in 1922 because half the teams had gone under. Foster had become increasingly volatile, increasingly less interested in league harmony. He stopped bailing out anemic teams and took to blaming those teams for their lack of meticulous business records, and made it appeal to black businessmen to enter the league while degrading teams who received white seed money. This called for the press to question Foster's methods, and the Black Pittsburgh Courier even called out his racial pretense, stating that Foster and Shoring got theirs and looked wise, dropping the name of Foster's silent white partner involvement with the Giants that wasn't widely known. Ed Bolden quietly had anxieties about Foster and the overall value of league membership, and the past season did nothing to ease his mind. During the 1921 and 1922 seasons, the Hillsdales lost 17 of 28 games in the Negro National League, and in December of 1922, Bolden submitted his letter to withdraw from the Negro National League. He said that he was at a decided disadvantage of ownership in the league and asked for his $1,000 back. Foster would not flatter Bolden into relenting, and he would not give him his money back either, calling the $1,000 league fee a deposit to cover expenses. But Bolden would hit Foster where it hurt the most. He would turn to Nathaniel Strong. Nathaniel Strong's power had eroded over the years, and his monopoly had mostly been broken by other bookers. So Nathaniel Strong was overjoyed when Ed Bolden revived him and formed what was essentially a society of Eastern teams who had been left out in the cold by the Negro National League. But Bolden had more in mind. He wanted to challenge Foster's Negro National League and start his own black baseball league without Rube Foster aspects. He billed himself as the anti-Foster, and from the start, the Hillsdales, the Royal Giants, the Cuban Stars were on board, and then Bolden signed 2 more clubs with bad blood with Strong: James Keene of the New York Lincoln Giants and Thomas Jackson from the Atlantic Backyard Giants. And lastly, the 6th member was the Baltimore Black Sox, owned by 2 white barkeeps, James Spilden and Roger Worcester. Bolden did not care about the complexion of his owners. Bolden was the only African American among them, and in December 16, 1922, the 16 representation met at a YMCA in Philadelphia to ratify the hierarchy of the Mutual Association of Eastern Baseball Clubs, with Ed Bolden as the chairperson. Although the constitution of the Mutual Association and the Negro League were the same, the league didn't feel compelled to broaden the spirit of harmony and cooperation in black baseball. The Negro League refrained from raiding players from the outlaw clubs, but the Mutual Association owners didn't feel the same spirit of community, and over the next 2 years, 18 Negro League players defected to the Eastern Association. Foster's only recourse was to shame the new league by trying to hide Nathaniel Strong. In the Chicago Defender, Foster would declare, "There's no such thing as black baseball when 4 and 5 of the directors are white, any more than you can call a streetcar a steamship." Bolden would respond to the criticism involving Nathaniel Strong, stating that he never paid Nathaniel Strong 1 cent for booking the Hillsdale club. What he didn't mention is that the other clubs did pay a ransom to Strong and Bolden for booking. The Eastern League was plagued by the same logistical issues of the Negro League. During the first season, the Hillsdales went 23-17 in the Eastern League, while going 137-46 against all other competition, while Strong's Brooklyn Royal Giants finished in third at 23-17. Strong's team didn't fare well in 1923, but he enjoyed being a lightning rod for Rube Foster's rant. The Eastern League was turning a profit just as Foster's league was hitting the skids. Still racked by the instability of the Negro League, having lost 4 teams in 1923, Toledo, Milwaukee, Pittsburgh, and Cleveland by the end of the season, and a month into the 1924 season, the Indianapolis ABCs came to an end and destroyed by the death of C.I. Taylor and raised from the Eastern League, which took 10 players, so the club disbanded. Foster was horrified by the numbers of the Negro League was taking. In 1923, 1923, receipts were at $193,000, down from $251 in 1921. All of the teams made money the first year, but now every single team was losing money in 1924. Even the American Giants were in trouble. They were still turning a profit at the gate, but had to dip into the coffers to bail out other teams out of bankruptcy. Foster was able to keep expenses low in 1923 with $162,000 in receipts, but was only able to turn that into a $31,000 profit. At this point, Foster was so desperate that he was not only drawing up the team schedules, but he was filling out their lineup cards. He would save the best pitchers for the most lucrative games, no matter the competition, which often led to inferior pitchers losing important games that weren't played on Sundays. This caused Tony Blount to rebel, and in 1924, he told Foster that he would no longer comply with his orders. The other owners demanded a meeting and a showdown at the next meeting of league clubs, but when the meeting came, they had nothing to say because they were all still afraid of Rube Foster. Foster would withhold league money from Tony Blount's Detroit Stars and cancel attractive dates. Then he found a new owner for the Stars when the Blount could no longer afford to carry on. With Foster's league declining fortunes by mid-1924, Foster met with J.L. Wilkinson and Ed Bolden to agree about a covenant. Wanted to fight for a repatriation of players from the Negro League and wanted a no-raid pledge from the league. But once an accord was reached, all Foster came away with an East versus West annual World Series, and this did nothing to align the two leagues. One league had a rating policy, the other didn't. One had essential authority, the other one didn't. One had Rube Foster, and the other didn't. Symbolic of Foster's decline, the World Series was played with Bolden's team participating, but Foster's club did not. J.L. Wilkinson's Kansas City Monarchs, who went 55-22, played against the Hillsdales in a best-of-9 series. The Monarchs would win the best-of-9 series in the first Negro World Series, but the real winner was at the gates. The league made $52,000 after $30,000 in expenses. The Monarchs earned about $10,000, half which was pocketed by J.L. Wilkinson, and the other half went to the players. Ed Bolden distributed the team's $6,500, or about $193 per player. The Hillsdales would return to play in the World Series the next season against the Monarchs and would rout them in 5 games. Bolden would even take out a mock eulogy for the Monarchs in the Pittsburgh Courier. But the largest event was 1925, was Rube Foster was in Indianapolis to attempt to restart the Indianapolis ABCs when a gas leak in his room left him unconscious, and he almost died before someone broke down the door and dragged his body to safety. Foster would recover, but was prone to illness and unable to play an active role in the 1925 World Series, and it was a financial disaster, producing less than $6,000 in profits, and players and owners began to lobby for the end of the World Series, and Rube was no longer able to fight for black baseball's main event. Rube would continue to have medical issues, hitting a pedestrian with his car and locking himself in a bathroom in his office until someone climbed in the window and talked him down. Because it was Rube, everyone let it be. But when he started smashing furniture in his home, police would have to be called to subdue him. And later, when he would attack a friend with an ice pick, a judge ruled that Foster was insane and had him committed to an asylum in Chicago. The American Giants would go on to win the World Series in 1927, but it was bittersweet because in 1927, in the 11-game series, only 21,000 people showed up and the series was canceled, with no one having the heart to tell Rube Foster. The league owners would elect William C. Huston. Huston would do little to help the Negro League that was already in deep trouble with Foster being incompetent. The league directors sold the American Giants to William E. Trimble, and the ballpark and the team will both fall apart due to neglect. But the Negro League was not the only one in trouble. In 1928, the Eastern League also collapsed. Bolden saw the decline coming, and a post-war boom had ended in the mid-20s, and the black economic class suffered economic losses, and with that, the fans vanished. The Hillsdale Amusement Corporation had to borrow money just to open up the 1925, 1926, and 1927 seasons. Bolden could no longer take the stress and had himself committed to a hospital in September 1927. Bolden would return in 1928, but he would withdraw the Hillsdales from the league that he had founded, stating that they were losing money in an impossible league. It was also time for Nathaniel Strong to go. The owners had continued to press for his ouster from the league, and when Bolden left the league, the owners voted him out, removing the Brooklyn Royal Giants too. By 1930, the Bactari Atlantic Giants, the Brooklyn Royal Giants, the New York Lincoln Giants had all folded, and the Negro League was also about to collapse. In December of 1930, Rube Foster died of a heart attack at the age of 51. 3,000 people attended his funeral, and the Negro League sent a floral wreath that weighed 200 pounds in the shape of a giant baseball, just as it looked like black baseball was about to fold up with the exit of Foster and Bolden. In the coming days, Satchel Paige and Job Gibson would create a thunder that would change black baseball forever. Thank y'all for listening. This has been One Mic, a Black History podcast. This has been the second episode in a 4-part series about the Negro Leagues. I'll be releasing another episode next week about the 30s and the Depression and about Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson. Also, as usual, if you like this, if you enjoy this, please consider donating to our Patreon page. I also started a Buy Me Coffee page, which will allow you to give one-time donations. Also, if you really like this, consider reviewing my podcast on Apple Podcasts. Please leave us 5 stars. And lastly, please listen to The Cut for all your pop culture needs. And peace.